Make sure you guys.
There we go. Recording and sharing, the two most important parts of this. All right, so exploring workspaces, experience options, how we might present them, user facing. We've gone through a number of these options, and the next one I want to talk about is Workspace as improved groups. And I mentioned this in some of the earlier videos. This one is really more of a, let's take the good parts of the other options that we put together and come up with a list of what it would take to kind of do everything based on Workspace's top level groups, but trying to address some of the other problems that might not necessarily be solving for. So root level or top level namespaces are the workspaces, but with some additional improvements to groups. So include everything from Workspace's top level groups. I won't re-go over all of this stuff. And the flow map, I think, is essentially the same as that one, although I have put in here, we talked about the possibility of having additional navigation. So basically what I'm saying is let it live in both, or not necessarily say that it shouldn't live in both. I think it could exist as part of the group tree structure, but there might be some benefits in having more additional kind of direct navigation to it. And then sharing, we'll talk about here in a second. So some of the additional group improvements improve the current sharing mechanism. So right now we do have sharing, what we call sharing, but it's really, you just have the ability to add groups as members to a project. So it's, in some sense it is sharing from the like membership level, but it doesn't go the other way, right? There's not, if you share a group, none of the assets are shared back the other way. It's just members this way. So in that though, there are some problems that arose. There's a number of issues around that sharing mechanism. Most of them have been about whether you're a direct or you're shared, and some of the permissions. It's not very clear which one, what's applicable in what situation. So we need to go back and clarify and think about some of the kind of membership inheritance things, either make them clear or change how they work, but we would have to do some on that side of, on the permission side of things, some work there. And then, like I mentioned, it's currently only focused on sharing members. We would need to allow asset sharing across namespaces. There is a number of discussions about that. This happens to be one of them. I won't necessarily go through all this, but kind of like we had talked about in the horizontal aggregation ones, some sort of sharing mechanism. I think I'm just saying let's not propose how it's going to look and create some other magical object that's going to accomplish this. Let's just say that we need to address it. There is one possible proposed solution. There are others, but we know we're going to need to fix the sharing side of things. Another thing is making a clear distinction between consuming and producing UIs for groups and projects respectively. So what I'm saying is I don't think that there is a clear use case for when to use a group and when to use a project. What I'm proposing is making that clear and focusing on the jobs to be done when you're in a project versus the jobs that are to be done in a group, and not necessarily assuming that most of those UIs are going to be the same. They might have the same features and be able to do the same things or many of the same things, but I think just replicating the UI and the functionality of it twice, I don't think is what our users need. I think we need a jobs to be done focused, particularly on groups that solve those as organizational tools, not as just projects. And then I think we're going to have to improve the navigation and really the wayfinding between namespaces. This is really the people are lost, people don't know where they are. Basically trying to address that problem. One possible solution for that is currently when you navigate to groups, when you click on anything, you're basically taken immediately out of that group and into the context of usually a project, which makes navigating back to that useless or very difficult to do, which makes the groups somewhat useless in the sense that I think right now people are just bouncing off of groups because that's how we've set up the navigation. If we can utilize that and maybe, you know, clicking on an issue in a group still keeps you in the context of that group or something, but let's explore the context switching and make sure that when we do choose to switch your context, meaning mostly the left-hand nav bar changes, right? Your list of links changes. Let's make sure that the times that we are doing that are intentional and in line with the jobs to be done that the user is trying to accomplish at that time. And then approve the ability for the user to orient themselves to where they are in the organization. So that could be breadcrumbs, could be part of the left-hand navigation, but I think don't really have a solution for that one yet, but I know that's something we need to investigate. It's very difficult to find where you currently are, and I've got to believe that that's a discoverability problem that we're going to need to address. So looking at problem statements, engineering efficiency, I think it would solve that. Access to permissions, I think it solves that. Feature parity solves that. Hierarchy solves that. It solves most of the navigation problems, but it does not solve really the overview for Workspace, unless, like I said, maybe there are some navigational things that we could do. Not necessarily saying as part of that menu, but I think there are some navigational things that we could do that would potentially make that overview easier to get to. So not necessarily a collection of solutions, more of a collection of a different set of problems to solve. But I think we kind of talked about this earlier. It does seem like there is a path that if we use workspaces as groups, there are some other problems that we have to solve, but if we have solved those, we can get the majority of these solved, except for two. The drawbacks are we're still not addressing user namespaces, and we are still not solving for admins and users pretty much, right? If you're in the top group, then you're in every group. We have not yet solved that problem. There could be some engineering kind of, if it's the root group, it just behaves differently. There could be some exceptions that are done there. So maybe we can address those. And then I would say the third thing is that it's not necessarily solving the overview necessarily. So questions on that one?
I think this one comes a long way and really does carry a much heavier load of solving things. It's interesting that you mentioned that this is not necessarily solving, but a new set of problems. It feels like this solution carries a lot of solutions to me. Being from my perspective, I love the pointing out. By the way, we hear over and over again about Workspace is with sus verbatims and everything that users don't know what features to use at groups or projects, and they just wish they could use. And there seems to be this talking point of, we'll just copy the same set of features for both and make them easy. And I love your definition between the two. And I love your correction, by the way, of don't carbon copy the feature set between the two. Sure, they can share a lot, if not most, of the same feature sets, but to drive a different differentiator between the two projects and groups, using jobs to be done, this is the way we intend jobs to be done, the jobs to be done for a project, and this is the way that we intend jobs to be done for a group. And most importantly, those are driven by what a user expects those jobs to be done are.
Right.
I think is super important, and helps to really clarify that problem and get away from the talking point of, let's just have the same features for everything. Well, then what's the point of having a projects in groups? They're just folders. The exact same folders, by the way. And further discussion that we've had before about the solution in particular is the navigation. I think I love the clarity of, sure, navigation is an issue, but really the issue is wayfinding.
Right.
I love that clarity. I think that that's super important. And the example that you shared with me and you talked about here is huge, because you expect a user to use the navigation, breadcrumbs being a part of the navigation, to go back and forth to you, and for us to break that prevents our user from learning anything. And honestly, you could throw almost anything at a user, and if you give them a way to learn along the way, it'll take no time for them to understand the tool. And we've taken that away, whether it was intentional or unintentional. We've taken that learnability opportunity away from our users, and we need to bring that back. I think those are huge.
Raised it to a bar where every click requires a complete relearning of your entire environment around you, because we've replaced it with where you were, and now you're in this new world with new navigation. And so it's you can't learn it because you're presented with a new thing all the time that may not be intentional.
We're, again, intentional or unintentional on our part, it is basically created, we have intentionally just dropped our users off the edge of the cliff. And so that's just a big example. That being said, admin is a big thing, of course, and so many of our other solutions talk about admin. I assume we have one final solution that brings that back, that discussion back in.
Yep. So let's I'll pause this and we'll get into that one.